Welcome to Basic Brewing Radio for Thursday, February 19th, 2015. I'm James Spencer. Here at Basic Brewing Radio, we're all about home brewing. This week, Chris Colby, editor of Beer and Wine Journal, talks about mashing for high-gravity beers. Why do our efficiency numbers tend to go down as we're cranking up the gravity of our all-grain beers? If you're new to home brewing and would like to get into the hobby for the first time, check out our website, basicbrewing.com, where you can find archives of our audio and video podcasts and our DVDs to walk you through basic and more advanced brewing techniques. You can follow me on Twitter. My username is Basic Brewing, all one word. We also have a Basic Brewing Radio and Basic Brewing Video page on Facebook at facebook.com/basicbrewing. We're on the Google Plus as well. And thanks again to everybody clicking on the Amazon.com associate link on our basicbrewing.com site. Whenever you think of Amazon, think of us first. Go to our website, click on our Amazon banner on the right-hand side of the page there at basicbrewing.com. That'll take you to Amazon, where you'll shop as you normally do, buy all kinds of fun things, sometimes get mentioned at the end of this show. Won't cost you any extra, and you'll be helping us to bring you this show, and we greatly appreciate your support. And I can't tell who bought what, so that, that's important. If you buy something that you think may be embarrassing, I don't know who you are. We also have associate links for Brew Your Own Magazine and the American Homebrewers Association on our site as well. You can find our Basic Brewing iPhone app on iTunes, our Android app on Amazon.com. We have a Windows Phone app. We're on the BlackBerry Podcast Directory, and we're on the Stitcher app as well. If you want to put a tip in our tip jar, some coinage in our guitar case, you can go to basicbrewing.com/support. Thanks to everybody who's done so already. Let's take a quick look into the mailbag. A couple more thoughts on brewing software after this past week's show. Gregory from South Windsor, Connecticut, has tried BrewPal and BeerSmith 2 and says BeerSmith 2 is better at handling extract batches. Gregory says, on BeerSmith 2, I was initially turned off by his high-profile marketing. But I guess that means Brad spends money on advertising, which is it's okay. But upon trying this only last week, I found it to be my solution. I was able to put in the ingredients that came with the beer kit I received from Maltos Express. I had the option to, or Maltos Express. I had the option to choose extract, choose the grains, malts, hops, and yeast. They all populated up on the list I built. Lo and behold, when I began the brew, a timer came up and told me to steep the grains. It was intuitive enough to assume that this was part of the process. There's also an inexhaustible list of beer recipes posted by other BeerSmith users, so I really don't need to look far for ideas as I grow as a brewer. Thanks, Gregory. Eric from Montreal says, I use mainly Brewer's Friend for recipe making and its various calculators, and I especially appreciate the advanced water calculator by Kai Troyster. Whenever I want to calculate something quickly for an idea or just get into the ballpark for a recipe, I find it great and user-friendly. However, since I'm a student and started homebrewing, also to save money on the long term, waiting for the laughing to die, Gregory says, with this hobby it won't happen anytime soon. Well, yeah, you'll eventually start saving money, but there is a little initial investment. Okay, anyway, Gregory says, I found the price to be quite high for Brewer's Friend compared to some other solutions. Moreover, like Douglas, I like having a physical log to store my recipes and experiments. I then figured out that you can have a free account on Brewer's Friend, which is limited to 5 recipes. This is great since it lets me use all the advantages of the software that I need. I then write my recipes in my notebook on brew day and just erase the old ones from the software once I have made them. Every bit of information I need is stored locally in my logbook whenever I want to browse it, and I recycle my 5 allowed recipes on the software on the fly, hence negating the 2 largest downsides of using it. There you go. I guess that's a good workaround for students on a budget. But I do hope that when Eric does get on his feet financially, he'll support the software developer, because it's important that creators of things are rewarded for producing good stuff so that they'll keep producing good stuff. Climbing off the soapbox. Speaking of creating good stuff, I posted a new episode of Basic Brewing Video this past Monday. In this episode, Steve and I taste the first half of our Party Guile Brew Day, an English barley wine. And man, was that beer good. And it was my turn to cook a dish to go along with the beer. And I chose a very easy and very tasty way to cook a chicken. You can slap that chicken into the slow cooker at the beginning of your brew day along with a few spices. No water. Just the chicken and some spices, and in a few hours you'll have a great meal for you and your family. And the good thing about it is that, whole chickens are cheaper per pound than the boneless, skinless stuff. And I think it tastes better. I like dark meat. So anyway, check that out on our Basic Brewing Video feed or on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/basicbrewing. And if you would, while you're there, take a minute and subscribe to the channel. And by the way, if you want to go to iTunes, and if you listen to the podcast or watch the podcast feed, if you would go to iTunes and do a comment or a rating or whatever, if you get time, we appreciate that greatly. Love seeing the good comments on there. Oh, before I forget, I believe that the registration is open for the National Homebrewers Conference right now. I think it's open from the 18th through the 24th, if my memory serves me properly. So there's not an advantage, as I understand, there's not an advantage to being first. So just during that period, you can register. And I have applied for press passes, so hopefully we'll see you out in San Diego. Okay. Today's topic may seem a bit advanced for those who haven't spent much time around a mash tun, but stick with us. If you've never done all grain brewing before, don't let this conversation scare you away. It's not that complicated. But when you get into the nitty-gritty, sometimes, it sounds complicated until you've done it a couple times. But for you all grain brewers, how many times have you formulated an all grain recipe for a high-gravity beer only to find that you've fallen short of your target original gravity? Are mashes for higher gravity beers just less efficient by nature? What's going on? Chris Colby of beerandwinejournal.com walks us through it. Chris Colby, welcome back to Basic Brewing Radio.
Hey, James. Thanks for having me on the show.
You wrote a couple of really cool articles on beerandwinejournal.com on calculating your efficiency with higher gravity mashes, or when you put more grain in the mash tun and you're trying to make a high gravity beer, a lot of times when you do that, your efficiency suffers. And you explain why that is, and then you talk about some ways and how you can kind of combat that. So it's a little bit complicated if you've never done all grain brewing before. This may take a little effort to understand, but I think that it will help you out around the mash tun when you are trying to calculate your efficiencies and such. First of all, I guess we have to address this question: what is mash efficiency, and how can you kind of do a ballpark estimation of what your mash efficiency should be?
Well, the basic idea behind mash efficiency, or sometimes it's called extract efficiency, homebrewers tend to call it those things, is there's a certain amount of, quote unquote, stuff in your grain, mostly carbohydrates, the starch that you dissolve out of it and later that gets degraded to sugars. But there's a certain amount of things that you can get from your grain that go in, that, will be dissolved in your wort and will contribute to the specific gravity of it. Again, it's overwhelmingly the sugars. But pro brewers call that extract, which, not to be confused with malt extract, but basically how much you get from your grain. So what you do is you can calculate, the simplest way to look at it is you can calculate how much could you possibly get from your grain if you got, 100% extract efficiency. What's the best you could do? Then you take your own, you take your own result that you got from brewing, and you compare those two. You take the 100% efficiency figure and divide it by your actual efficiency figure, and that will give you your extract efficiency. So make it a little more concrete, what you do is for each grain in your grain bill, you would take the weight of the grain, and for American homebrewers, it's usually in pounds, and then you take a measure of the extract potential. Okay, this would be given on your malt analysis sheet if you had one, but for homebrewers, they mostly use just averages or whatever. For example, most pale malts yield about 37 points per pound per gallon. That's the unit that a lot of homebrewers would use. You could equivalently state that as point gallons per pound. And so you multiply the weight of the grain in pounds by the extract potential in point gallons per pound, and you sum all those up for each different grain, because you would do that for your pale malt, then you do that for your crystal malt, you do that for, if you had any roast malts or whatever, and you would get a figure in point gallons. And that would be, since you use the extract potential, that would give you the maximum that you could have got. And so you'd end up with, some number in point gallons. And then what you do is when you do your own batch, you measure your original gravity, and that gives you, how many gravity points you have. Then you multiply that by how many gallons you got, and that gives it in point gallons. And then you take that first number you calculated over the second number, and that will yield, 0 point something. And the next two numbers are the efficiency, if it's, say, 75% or 80.
So if you want a specific chart on what all the potentials for a lot of different grains are, if you check out page 193 in John Palmer's How to Brew, it's got a chart there. What I do, because I'm not a professional brewer, and my livelihood isn't determined by how efficient my mash tun is. I use 37 as a general number for the amount of stuff that I'm wanting out of my grain. So let's use a real world example here. So in looking at my brewer's logbooks here, found a couple of examples. First of all, we have a beer that has 10 pounds of a pale malt. So we have 10 pounds of pale malt, which has a gravity potential of 37, let's say, 37 points per pound. So that's a nice even number. That's 370 points. So if we get 100% mash efficiency, we will get 370 points. But what I collect is 6 gallons of wort at 1045. So 6 times 45 is 270. So 270, which is what I actually got, divided by 370, which is what I was hoping to get if I got 100%, 270 divided by 370, 72% mash efficiency, which is not too bad. It's okay. It's about in the ballpark. I mean, new all grain brewers should not expect 100% efficiency, right?
Oh, no. Home brewers, I think efficiency is getting a little bit better over time, but home brewers are a lot of times anywhere really from 60 to 80%. 70 to 5, if I had to guess, would probably be what most people get. Some people do it a little bit better, especially if you've been at it a while and you understand the variables that contribute to it. Like the overwhelmingly important one is getting a fine enough crush. But homebrewers, like I said, if I had to guess, I would guess 70 to 75% is probably average for most homebrewers, especially beginners.
I mean, what they've got, I believe, how they get that 100% of number is if they grind the malt to powder, and then of course you can't do that in a mash tun because you don't want to, first of all, because you get the tannins from the husk, right? And then you could never get all the wort out if you would just have dough instead of a mash.
Right. The number for extract potential which homebrewers usually use in points per pound per gallon, that's a laboratory number that malt companies do for each and every batch of malt they make. And for homebrewers, we don't generally get the malt, analysis for the malt we use. We just use average numbers. So that can actually affect your efficiency too. If you have a batch where the extract potential of your grain was 36 instead of 37, and you didn't know that, you might think, hey, something went wrong, but it might not have.
Right. Okay, so let's use another real-world example to kind of illustrate what we're talking about here. I looked up a recipe for a zombie Belgian that I did back in 2010. I had 13 pounds of grain. So if we multiply 13 times 37, you get 481. And what I actually collected was 6.75 gallons at 1047. So 6.75 times 47 gives us 317. So 317 divided by 481 gives 65% efficiency. So by using more grain, my efficiency suffered. What happened? How did I go down? Was it just a crappy day for me in the mash tun that I lose 10 points of efficiency? What happened there?
Well, this is actually a fairly common occurrence in homebrewers, and there's a specific reason for it. There's no inherent reason why mashing more grain would give you lower extract efficiency. I mean, if you think about it, like that would mean commercial brewers would have terrible, because their mashes are much, much larger than homebrewers. Mm-hmm. So there's no inherent correlation between the original gravity of your beer, or the size of your grain bill, and extract efficiency. But because of typical homebrewing practices, there can be, for this reason. A lot of times, homebrewers will collect the same amount of wort every time they brew, regardless of the expected original gravity of their beer, or the size of their grain bill. And so what you'd have is, for normal sized beers, they have the grain in there. They add their strike water, and then they add a certain amount of sparge water, which completely, fully sparges the grain bed. But for larger batches, you need more strike water. But then when it comes time to, if you're going to collect the same volume for a larger beer to boil, the same pre-boil volume, you need to use correspondingly less sparge water, because you've added more strike water. So with larger and larger beers, let's say, whether you're brewing a dry stout or an imperial stout, you're going to start out with 6.5 gallons and boil it down to 5. In the case of the dry stout, you've probably fully sparged the grain bed. You've collected all the sugars you can out of it, and then you boil it down. But in the case of the imperial, because you're not going to go over 6.5 pre-boiled volume, you've left some sugars behind. And so in that case, in the special case of collecting the same amount of wort every single time you brew, just regardless of the size of your grain bed, then there becomes a correlation between extract efficiency and your expected original gravity, and that is just due to incompletely sparging the grain bed.
And that can cause problems, like, for instance, if I were formulating this recipe for this Belgian, and based on the extract potential of the grain and the amount of that I would collect of wort before boiling, if I used a figure of 75% efficiency, I'd expect my pre-boil gravity to be 1053 instead of 1047. So, if you're really wanting your recipe to be on the dot, you can really start to go off the tracks at that point. And if you're looking at your refractometer at that point, you might be really disappointed in what you got.
Right. And like I said, it's really, one way to look at it is that the larger the grain bed you have, in the special case of collecting the same amount of wort every time, the larger your grain bed, the less sparge water you use. So that would be why when people do it that way, they experience lower extract efficiencies at higher expected original gravities.
And,
Now,
and the less sparge water would be because they would maintain the same amount of water per grain ratio when they're mashing in or doughing in. And so during the mash, it would have the same thickness as a lower gravity beer. So
right.
they wouldn't need to sparge as much to collect the same amount of pre-boil volume.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. One way of looking at it is your first wort, if you keep your mash thickness the same, as the size of your grain bill goes up, you add more sparge water or more strike water. I'm sorry, and you collect more first wort. Wort that just runs out of the lauter ton and has not been sparged yet. So the more first wort you have, if in the special case that you're just shooting for the same pre-boil volume every time, the more first wort you have, the less sparged wort you need. So the solution, of course, to the whole problem is to simply sparge your grain bill, your grain bed, until it's fully sparged every time. But that leads to, for larger and larger beers, that leads to longer and longer boil times, and some people just don't have the equipment to hold that much pre-boil wort. Some people just don't, they don't have the time. They don't want to spend 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 hours boiling down the wort. And so one of the things I did on those articles on Beer and Wine Journal was give you a way to predict how much your extract efficiency is going to slide at higher volumes or higher expected original gravities.
So basically, I mean, if you're mashing at the same water per grain ratio, are your first runnings going to be the same gravity with a smaller beer and a bigger beer?
Yeah. If you same mash thickness, no matter what the size of your grain bill, the mash at the two mashes at the same thickness, regardless of their size, should yield first wort that's the same specific gravity. Assuming it's the same malt, the same heat, the same. If everything is the same and the mash thickness is the same.
So what's the solution? I mean, is it just to throw more grain into the mash tun and say, to heck with the efficiency, I'm just going to hit my target original gravity?
Well, there's a number of solutions. The one, like I mentioned, is just sparge till you have just oodles and oodles of pre-boil wort, and spend the time and money on propane to boil it all down. Another is you can always just add malt extract in your kettle to knock up your efficiency, for whatever you've lost. Or you can add more grain to your grain bill to compensate. And you can do, in the case of malt extract, you can take just your kettle volume, or I'm sorry, your gravity in your kettle, and you can calculate how much more malt extract you're going to need. But if you're going to plan to add more grain to your mash tun, that's something that you have to plan for ahead of time. You can't, once your wort is in the kettle, you can't go backwards in time and add more grain to your
mash tun time machine.
Mash tun time machine, yeah.
And if you're looking to make like a lighter colored high gravity beer, doing a complete sparge and collecting a big old volume of wort and then boiling down over a long period of time, that might darken your beer.
It could, but it really, I don't know. I've done some pretty high gravity triples with just Pilsner malt and also some sugar added later. But yeah, it can darken it a little bit, but not too bad really. A light colored boil. Or light colored wort, you can actually boil quite a while before it starts getting noticeably darker.
And I guess this might be an interesting time to say that you can use gravity points in the same way that we use to calculate efficiency to predict what your gravity will be at the end of a boil.
Right. There's an equation in chemistry just called or at least I call it the concentration and volume equation, and just CV equals CV, and so which is concentration times volume equals concentration times volume. So what you do if you had a pre-boil wort, let's say you had 6 gallons, V would be six uh, in the V on the left hand side of the equation, and let's say your pre-boil wort was 1048. You would just go with 48 points times 6 gallons on the left hand side, and then if you plan to boil it down to 5, you would just have 5, and then C on the other side. So you'd have, what is that, 5C equals 6 times 48, and somewhere in your high school algebra knowledge, you should be able to figure that out.
Well, let's use my Belgian as an example here. I had 6.75 gallons at 1047. So that's 6.75 times 47, 317.25. And then if I were to boil down that wort from 6.75 gallons to, say, 5.5, I would have the same amount of gravity points, so 317.25, and I just divide that by 5.5 gallons, and I would get 57.68. So if I had 6.75 gallons of wort at 1047 and I boiled that down to 5.5 gallons, I would have a wort of 1057. So that's handy, and that shows the value of taking measurements like pre-boil volume and pre-boil gravity, because then you can make some judgments. Like, for instance, if you were wanting to hit a specific gravity, you could just boil the wort until it hit the predicted volume that you would need to do that, and that gives you kind of more control over the final product.
Yeah, knowing how to calculate your expected gravity, given how much you boil down, can help you, especially in bigger beers when sometimes things don't go as well as you expect. You can decide, am I going to boil this a little bit longer and concentrate it, or am I going to, settle for a lesser original gravity, and sort of being able to calculate what it would be if you boiled it down to, say, 5.5 gallons or 5 or 4.5. It lets you make some decisions, and you can sort of, do a kick save and try to, make some recipe decisions during your brew day, in the case that you didn't maybe get the extract efficiency that you wanted.
Now, you've got in the second article, you went into you drew some charts and some graphs.
Yeah.
And so what kind of plots or points are you plotting on those graphs, and how can they be useful around the brew pot?
Okay, yeah, the way or what the second article shows is how you can take data from your own brewing and use it to predict what your extract efficiency is going to be based on your expected original gravity. Okay, like I said, if you fully sparge your grain bed all the time, then your extract efficiency should not vary with your original gravity. But if you are the sort of person that, you always collect like 6 or 6.5 gallons and you always boil it down, whether it's a big beer or a small beer, then there's a fairly simple way to just find out what your extract efficiency should be at any different expected original gravity. And that's basically just go through all the beers in your notebook, or at least all the recent ones. If your extract efficiency has changed over time due to you getting better or whatever, then use only the most modern readings, and just plot extract efficiency versus there's two ways you can do it: extract efficiency versus original gravity in the case where you collect exactly the same amount of wort every time. Or if you collect slightly different amounts, you can plot extract efficiency versus the ratio of grain weight to your pre-boil wort volume. And that basically, grain weight to pre-boil wort volume basically gives you a measure of how fully sparged your grain bed is. Because as your pre-boil wort volume goes up, for any given grain weight, okay, that ratio is going to go down, and that's going to mean that your grain bill is more fully sparged because you collected more wort from it. Like and not that this will hold for everybody, but most beers that I make, if I fully sparge the grain bed to the point where the gravity has dropped to, like, of the final runnings has dropped to 2 to 3 Plato, and the pH has crept up to like 5.8 or so, which are the usual cutoff points. I usually have somewhere in the vicinity of 0.65 gallons of wort per every pound of grain.
Hmm.
So, and that's on my system with my crush, the speed that I lauter with and all that. So you'd have to figure it out. Every home brewer would need to figure out that number for his own, but it's probably a decent starting point since I don't do anything super crazy technique wise. And anyway,
wait a minute, 6.75 gallons of wort per every.
No, 0.65.
0.65. Okay.
Yeah. No, 6 point.
Yeah. I was going to say, boy, that's
that'd be like having a pound of grain in your grain bill, and then you'd have 6 pounds or 6 gallons of wort.
My beers are all weak and astringent.
Yeah. This tastes like hurdy water.
Okay, I just wanted to make that clear. I guess I don't know what we'll hear about in the playback whether you misspoke or I misheard. So,
that's brewing. That's brewing the hard way. If you're yielding over 6 gallons of wort for every pound of grain, yeah,
takes me forever to boil.
Yeah.
It's like I'm making maple syrup. Okay. All right. Is there any way to get us back on track? That's the question.
That's a good question. Yeah, I think back on track is, that's about how much it's one way to measure how much you're getting from your grain bill. So if you take the extract efficiency, which you calculate for each and every beer, and then you plot it versus the total weight of your grain bill over your pre-boil wort volume. What you do is you'll get a scatter plot of lines or of points all over, and then if you happen to have access to statistical software or you have a spreadsheet that will do this calculation, you can calculate a best fit line through it. If you don't, I've just done it on graph paper and just sort of eyeball it. What's the best fit line through all the points, and what you'll see usually is, again, in the special case where you're undersparging or progressively undersparging larger and larger grain bills, is just a line, or sometimes it might be actual curve of extract efficiency at different either original gravities or grain weight over pre-boil wort volumes. And so from there, you can go back and look, and let's say every time you've brewed a beer in the vicinity of 1080, let's say you got 70% efficiency, whereas at normal efficiency, let's say you're used to getting like 82 or something. Then next time you go to formulate a recipe that's in the 1080 range, you would say, okay, well, I know from previous experience, from the little chart, that in that range my extract efficiency was whatever made up number I just gave, and and you would use that in your recipe formulation.
So does brewing software help out in this way?
Brewing software you'll be able to calculate your extract efficiency from, but I'm not super acquainted with all the different software packages out there. But from what I know, I don't think there is any brewing software that takes this into account. For one thing, it would be nice that instead of having to draw, the graph from data and figure out your your drop in extract. It would be nice if there was just a theoretical way that you could calculate it from like first principles, but that I don't know, that gets kind of because I tried to, and that's or it's at least beyond my mathematical abilities because you would have the wort you collect as first wort, and that would be of certain gravity, usually in the 1090 range, and then if you were continuously sparging, the wort as it comes off would decrease until in the end it's down to specific gravity of 1.008 to 1.012, somewhere in there. But you'd have to sort of know the curve. Does it decrease linearly? Does it, is it? And you could hypothetically calculate from like sort of first principles, like so you don't need to have actual data to do it. But that's, I don't know, it's at least harder than I could manage in an afternoon when I tried it.
Plus, everybody's brew house is different. Everybody's mash tun is different. Everybody's method of either continuous sparging or batch sparging is different. It would be kind of a nightmare to try to figure out all the different permutations of all that, you would think.
Yeah, because you'd need to do one for batch sparging, of which there's, thousands of little variations. Some people add a little water to their mash tun before, each runoff. Some don't. And then you'd probably, for completeness sake, want to throw in brew in a bag, which is a whole nother can of worms when it would come to calculating that. But the good thing is that the general idea of there being a correlation between extract efficiency and the degree, how much wort you collect out of your grain bed, that's going to hold no matter what your lautering method is. That's not going to change with continuous sparging, batch sparging, or if you do BIAB. In all those cases, if you yielded an amount of wort that was proportional to your grain weight, then your extract efficiency would be the same all the time. But if you're yielding less wort per unit of grain for higher gravity beers, then your extract efficiency is going to go down.
There were some good questions posted on the post, on the article. One was from Little Boy Brew asking about the role of different specialty grains and the ratio of different specialty grains to base malts in each recipe. I mean, would that cause some variation when you're plotting your lines or your dots?
Well, first of all the normal extract retention of all that grain, that's all going to be built into when you calculate your extract efficiency. So that's already taken into consideration. What the measure of grain weight over pre-boil wort volume is a measure of how fully sparged your grain bed is, and so that's like a separate variable. That's saying you've got all the normal variables that apply in extract efficiency, both the weight and the extract potential and the volume and all the actual variables that go into it. But then since it's a measured on the plot, it's a measured a variable, there's also all pH and your technique and everything that actually went into producing the original gravity that you got. That's all taken care of. And the only thing you're adding by doing this is you're saying that, wait, there's one more variable, and that's the degree to which the grain bed is sparged.
It all makes sense. I mean, when I first started doing, higher gravity beers with all grain, I didn't really get it. And it's so simple, but until you think about it that way, you don't know. So it's just you're basically, if you're not rinsing out all those sugars, they're going to stay in the mash tun, and you're just not going to get them in your beer.
Yeah, there's a couple different ways to think about this, and I think one thing that from a couple of responses, I think a couple things that threw people is, one of it is I use grain weight and a measure of volume, grain weight per pre-boil volume, and some people got that sort of confused with mash thickness. and it's nothing to do with mash thickness. Um, it's it's the same two variables, the weight of grain and an amount of liquid, but it's first of all they're flipped, and it's completely different than mash thickness. And yeah, there's a couple ways to think about it. Like I explained it earlier, as the more first wort you have, the less sparge water you're going to have. Again, when we're collecting the same amount of volume. But you can also think about it as just the ratio of wort you collect to the size of your grain bill. If you're going to get the same, if you're going to rinse the grain bill completely, the amount of wort you get for every little bit, every unit of grain, there should be a certain amount of wort you collect. And so the bigger your grain bill, the bigger your pre-boil volume. That's another way to think about it. And I know in brewing a bag, one way to think about it is if when you pull out your grain bag, your pre-boil volume is the same every time, then with larger grain bills, your wort gravity is going to be higher because you've got more grain in there. But you also, all the wort that's trapped in your grains is going to come out. So you're pulling out higher gravity wort, and you're also pulling out more of it because in a larger grain bed, more is entrained. So that's a way to think about it with regards to brewing a bag. If you're trying to think about it in regards to batch sparging, it's a little fuzzier, but the same basic idea holds, is that you need a certain amount of water rinsing the sugars from your the grain bed after the first wort is gone, and if that amount is decreasing with larger and larger beers, you're leaving more and more sugar behind in the kettle.
I mean, I guess if you think about it, this is why party guile brewing works. If you're brewing a big old barley wine and you fill your mash tun with a ton of grain, and you do your first runnings and don't sparge at all, you're going to get a high gravity first running, and then when you do second runnings, when you fill up your mash tun again and do second runnings, there's enough sugar left over in the mash tun and the grain to do a decent gravity beer.
Yeah, I don't specifically know the history, the nitty gritty history of party guile brewing, but that's almost assuredly the genesis of it. I mean, brewers, after they run off their first wort and then they boil that to make a strong beer, they at some point must have recognized, like, hey, there's a lot of extract left in those, or a lot of sugars left in that grain bill, and I can do something with them.
So you could still measure the efficiency of that mash, but you would have to combine all of the gravity points of all of the runnings that you took. Does that make sense? I mean, you would have to figure out what the gravity of the whole thing would be. Like if you like, for instance, with the party guile brew I did with Steve recently, he pulled off 2.5 gallons and made a big beer with that, and then pulled off another 2.5, or I guess 3 gallons because it was pre-boil volume. So he pulled off 3 gallons, did a big beer with that, and pulled off, filled up the mash tun with 3 gallons more, pulled that off. So in order to figure out the efficiency of that process, you would have to effectively combine those two worts together and then measure the gravity and the volume.
Yeah, if you were collecting 2 or more different worts from a single grain bed, and you wanted to calculate your overall, like your combined extract efficiency, yeah, you'd need to one way to do it would calculate the point gallons for each batch, then sum those up, and then that would be the basis of your comparison. Yeah, that would be, I don't know, that's it's just more algebra, not conceptually hard, but
well, I think once I started scratching things out with a pencil and a paper, I could figure it out. Well, it's a lot to think about, but I mean, once you get it in your head, it's a fairly easy concept. Basically, you're just when you put more grain in the mash tun and you are collecting the same amount of wort that you usually do pre-boil. You're just leaving some sugars behind in the mash tun. Therefore, your process is going to be less efficient.
Right. I mean, this idea is not like unknown in the homebrewing, but the thing about making a graph from your existing data and drawing an actual line that it takes you from knowing like, oh, my efficiency is getting worse at higher gravities and having to just guess at how much more grain to add. This gives you a way to calculate it. You take your estimated extract efficiency based on your past brewings at various volume or at various expected OGs, and then you can calculate what your expected the extract efficiency you normally get at that at that expected original gravity or that degree of grain bed sparging, and apply that to your your recipe formulation.
Well, there you go. It's good stuff. It's for somebody just going into all grain brewing, it might be a little tough to it might be too big of a bite to chew all at once. But I think that once you read the article and think about it, it'll make sense. And that way, next time you brew a big old beer, you won't be disappointed when your efficiency numbers go down. You'll kind of understand what's going on.
Yeah, and one nice thing is that when you're brewing sort of normal gravity beers, within a certain range, your extract efficiency is going to be pretty flat. Just sort of practice shows that, because a lot of times, especially with smaller beers, sometimes people collect less volume of wort and then just top it up with water. And so, but there's that sort of, spot in the middle where you are fully sparging your grain bed and then boiling it down. And through those beers, your extract efficiency should be pretty flat. And it's really when you get up into the larger beers and you're collecting a lot of first wort and then just, sort of only sparging with a couple gallons of water, that, you start to see the really big discrepancies in extract efficiency. And that's where this helps. Assuming that you've taken good enough notes that you can go back and construct the graph. If it's your first time brewing a higher gravity beer and you plan, you're only going to, even though it's a barley wine, you're only going to collect 6.5 gallons, then then it's just going to be a stab in the dark. I mean, you're going to be undersparged, and you just have to sort of, you have to wing it and get what you get, take good notes. And then the next time around, you'll have a better guide to what what you can do.
That'll be the first point on the graph in that direction. Well, very good. I appreciate it, Chris.
Thanks for having me on the show.
Well, thanks again to Chris. If the concept is still a little foggy, check out Chris's articles on beerandwinejournal.com. He does a great job, as usual, of explaining it all. If you have brewing questions yourself, show suggestions, or just want to say howdy, write to James at basicbrewing.com, or just fill out the contact form on basicbrewing.com. And please don't forget to tell us where you're from. Check out our support link where you can throw a couple of bucks into the tip jar by subscribing financially to our podcasts. Be sure to check out our DVDs, Extract Brewing and Partial Mashing, Stepping into All Grain, Low-Tech Lagering and Decoction Mashing, and Introduction to Wine Kits. You can find them all on our site. You can check out our Basic Brewing shirts in the store as well. You can see a listing of the fine folks across the country who sell our DVDs on basicbrewing.com. And if there isn't a vendor in your area, you can order them online in our online shop at basicbrewingshop.com. Thanks to everybody who's continued to click on our Amazon.com link. We greatly appreciate the support there. Our featured products this week that were pushed through the link are Helen Chen's Asian Kitchen Bamboo Sushi Mat with Paddle, and battery-operated combination carbon monoxide and smoke detector with talking alarm. That would scare the heck out of me. Apparently it says fire when there's a fire. Whew. If it were me, I'd program it to say some profanities in there to make sure you got up out of bed. Especially. Thanks again, everybody. Remember, I can't tell who bought what, so no worries there. Just click on the Amazon.com logo on our site the next time you feel like Amazon shopping. We greatly appreciate your support. Fire! And don't forget, you can also join the American Homebrewers Association or subscribe to Brew Your Own magazine. Heck, you can do both through the associate links on basicbrewing.com. That's all until next time. Until then, thanks for listening, everybody. I'm James Spencer. Production help for Basic Brewing Radio and our website is provided by Kelly Dodson. Basic Brewing Radio is a production of Active Voicing. We'll talk to you next time, everybody. So long.